Welcome. I'm so happy to have this conversation tonight. This has just been, I have been eagerly waiting for this. I have been following Antonia Scatton for a long, long time, and I am an amateur, but a student of messaging, so I am looking forward to learning a lot this evening, and I'm sure you will all learn a lot as well. So, Antonia, welcome, welcome. This is the best way to come to Arizona in the summer to not be here. Where are you this evening?
Oh, I am in Chicago, or actually Oak Park, if you know where Oak Park is. It is the first suburb west of
Hmm.
Chicago. So, yeah, and it's only 90 here. So, but fortunately, our humidity has been a little lower than usual. So, it's the other day it was like 85 with 90% humidity. It was gnarly.
Oh,
But having lived in Arizona when it's 90 here, I'm just and the humidity is low. I'm like, nah, I'm good. That's
yeah.
90. 90 is perfectly fine.
Yeah, in Arizona, anything under 100 is just nothing to
Yep.
even mention. Um, so the way I love to start all these conversations is to ask you to tell us about yourself, but also tell us your journey, your personal journey to the here and now. How did you start doing this work and what brought you here?
Oh, well, it's actually, it's funny because even though my life has been crazy and I've done a million different things, there's been a few things that have stayed consistent since like day one. Basically, I throwing parties for a living in Chicago. And I I went to a meeting and then I was in New Hampshire working on a presidential campaign. It's very hard to explain how that happened, but I just went like I got curious about something, went to a meeting. 2 weeks later, I was in New Hampshire. I worked for the Jerry Brown campaign in 1992 when he ran for president on the money is the root of all evil campaign platform. Um, and I traveled all over the country with that campaign. Like I just jumped on and became a roving campaign person. And everywhere I went, I ran into people spouting conservative talking points. Um, and they were using the same language. And these people were like, they thought that they were like forming their own thoughts and opinions, but I would see the same thing coming in the same words, in three different states. And I was like, how did they do this? Like, how do these people, like, clearly these people are like getting their ideas into people's heads and, feeding them this really kind of ass backwards thinking. And, how do they do this? And why aren't we doing it? Or what can we learn about how to do this? And then so I came back to Chicago and I went back to school and I studied communication and psychology. And, I come from kind of a nerdy family. So whenever we want to figure something out, we like, well, I have to go to school and research. So, and that's where I learned about Lakoff. That's where I learned about, the psychology of communication. And and the other thing that I learned then was that in that campaign was that volunteers can do literally anything. The volunteers are amazing. They're brilliant. Often they are people with incredible professional skills that you haven't even begun to tap into. So those are like the two big strains that have like led my path through life is how do we understand how to form what is this kind of group process of forming ideas in people's heads and giving them language to express it? And then also, how can we fight money in politics by tapping into the enormous wealth of skills that the people in our communities have? So, and that is the crazy path I've taken since then. It all makes sense if you look at it through the lens of those
Hmm.
those sort of two missions.
Hmm. Yeah, and I have been fascinated by the whole concept of framing, because I just believe you see the world through the life that you have lived, through the your family, your community where you grew up, the education you've had, and that sort of forms boundaries around your way of thinking and what you perceive. But you struck a couple of really important notes, which is sort of curiosity and attention. You were paying attention to what people were saying, and you were curious about that. And so you sort of dug more into it. And I think that, frankly, I think curiosity is what gets us the farthest in life. But you
Yes,
mentioned
I
your
suffer from it terribly.
yeah. Um, so you mentioned George Lakoff, and you also mentioned, we've already touched on framing. So can you talk a bit about what framing means and, maybe describe who George Lakoff was for people who may not know and what the learnings that you have carried on from him?
Well, let's see. So he's a cognitive linguist, which means he's a pioneer in the study. Like he basically invented the field of more or less invented the field of cognitive linguistics, which is sort of like how do we take how can we learn about how the brain works by observing how we use language and this very intimate relationship between words and language and thinking about how thinking um it's a I don't even know how to explain it. Like he's figured like we tend to think of the brain as like, the mind is this abstract thing floating around out there, but it's not. It's actually rooted in our brains and the biology of our minds. And there's this whole discipline that teaches you like we often think there's things about how human beings think that make no sense. But if you know what's going on in the brain, you're like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we need to know that. And we need to know how that works so that we can communicate effectively. And so he wrote this book called Moral Politics in 1996. Most of his work is actually in brain science and language, but he dabbles in politics. And in this book, he kind of put forth, he explained how our attitudes towards government and authority um, are really based on how we perceived authority as children and with our parents. And so he had all these theories that explained why conservatives think the way they do, why liberals think the way they do. And then he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, which became like a big hit because it explained it in a little more simple terms. Now I've been a huge fan of his work, and then I went out and studied with him in California because, I read his book in 96 and then I went out and worked in politics and I was like, why don't we do what he says we should do? And then I went and studied with him for quite a while. And he was like, why don't people do what I told them to do? They've all read the book now. And I'm like, well, because it's hard. It's really hard. And so I worked with him for about a year trying to figure out like how do we get people to understand what's so useful about this without having them have to read like 14,000 pages of science. So a lot of my work has been like, how do we find fun and interesting ways to explain things that are actually like fairly significant and complicated. So one of the things I realized is that I can't use a bunch of science and facts to teach framing because framing is about not using science and facts to teach things. So I figured out I had to frame framing.
Hmm.
And so this is kind of so I'll tell you, this is how I kind of figured out how to frame framing. And I use this example. So I'm assuming most people on this call have seen the movie Jaws. I think it's fairly fair. So when Ridley Scott, the director, tried to pitch the movie Alien to producers, he called it Jaws in space. Now, you don't need to hear anything else to know that like, okay, this is like going to be a huge hit. There's going to be a horrible monster. Like basically this, he could have told them in words, okay, there's going to be this monster and it's going to be revealed a tiny little bit at a time until you do. But by framing it in terms of the movie Jaws, he immediately conveyed to those people how it would feel, that like get a glimpse, framing is basically using things people already think and feel to communicate what you want people to think and feel about something. So, in the same respect, using a term like the Green New Deal activates the positive feelings. Like we have tons of knowledge about the New Deal. Most people in America have positive feelings, job creation, rescued the economy from, so all these great things. When you say Green New Deal, it transfers all of that to the transition to renewable energy. And it's accurate. It's like, yes, it is exactly that. It's like a New Deal, but for renewable energy. Um, and so, it's a very effective, despite people's attempts to attack it, it's a very effective phrasing because it really does say it takes it's a shortcut to like taking something you already know and feel and using it to explain something instead of paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of language.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's also interesting how the other side has twisted the Green New Deal to mean some sort of, monster, some sort of horrible thing. And, that makes me one of the things I've really wrestled with is how that is done. How do you is the other side also able to convey something that we mean to be a good thing as a bad thing? And I often think about, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, CRT, things like
Right.
that, that just by abbreviation, they become something else. Um, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things about acronyms is that so the thing about framing is that when you use a word, like a phrase like the New Deal, it lights up the part of your brain that has all that pre-existing content. The word green in this context, pre-existing content. The letter D, no pre-existing content.
Ah, okay.
DEI. So when you turn diversity, equity, and inclusion into DEI, you detach it from the meaning of the
Ah,
words. And
that makes
then,
perfect sense.
so every time we try to coin a new phrase, we create an opportunity for Republicans to define it, to take over the meaning of it, to
Mm,
attack the meaning of it. Now, the reason that that fails with the Green New Deal is because green is associated with the environment. It just is. They're not going to undo that.
mm,
It's very well established. The New Deal is a real thing. We know what it is. They're not going to redefine that. If we called it the GND, they could have
mm,
totally taken it over. But because the words light up your parts of your brain involuntarily, every time they go out and attack the Green New Deal, all they're doing is reinforcing the association in our mind, in people's minds, between the New Deal and clean energy, which helps us. So I've talked to people and they say, well, oh, well, they've made this term toxic. We can't use it. And I'm like, why not use it? They may say it's bad, but to the
mm,
average listener, like if you look at the research, Medicare for all, which is also just like, well, it's Medicare, but for everybody, how much more clear could you be? Terms like that, if you look at the research of public opinion, the ideas behind those things are not only majority popular, like 65% plus, but they're just as popular using those terms as they are describing them in more supposedly neutral language. So we have seen zero negativity coming off of their attempts to demonize those terms.
Oh.
Um, but it's that same thing of like, like so when we say like, well, if we were to say Democrats are not communists, like I hope we know better than to fall for that one. But when we
Hmm.
say Democrats are not communists, we're still lighting up the part of people's brains that contain the idea of Democrats and the part of people's brains that contain the idea of communism and connecting the two things. So when they attack us using our language, they help us.
Hmm.
When we try to attack them using their language, we're helping them. So only talk about the things you want people to think and only talk about things together that you want connected in people's brains. But the thing with the like acronyms are terrible. Just like never use acronyms because it's a lot, and also like using equity instead of equality. I don't know when we decided to do that, but equality is a powerful foundational word in our culture. I think they chased us off of it by trying to make it toxic, and we fell for it and started using equity because we thought it was more accurate or something.
Hmm.
And I understand what people are trying to say with it, but what we did is like we sacrificed common understanding and clarity. Um, we lost the power of the word by swapping it out for something academic, narrow and academic. So let me just say, like, there's a couple of sort of um rules about like what works here. So it's got to be familiar. You don't want to use you can't activate a frame if they don't already have it in their brain. So if you're trying to explain to people something is, you are not activating it. You're the whole point of framing is to wake up something that's already there, not try to plant something new. That can't be done kind of instantly and subconsciously. And it has to be clear and unambiguous. Like if a word's got too many different meanings, then, especially if you're using like a less common meaning, like food insecurity. Like insecurity means like I'm not secure. The cure to insecurity is for me to get confidence. We're not solving people's food insecurity by getting them to feel more confident about food, like so it sends people down the wrong mental path, and then we have to be like, no, 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 you're going this way, and we're trying to get you over here. So never use the secondary meaning of a word. Um, and try not to use words that have more than one meaning if you can avoid it. And it's
Hmm.
just, I mean, the most important thing is just find the meaning that you are trying to convey, what's like morally urgent about it. Um, for example, so the flip side is defund the police. It is like the hat trick of bad framing. It's unfamiliar. People don't know what the heck you're talking about when you say defund the police. It's misleading because defund doesn't mean, slight shift in funding. It means eliminate by taking the funding away. Um, and it takes something incredibly emotionally powerful and reduces it to budget policy. So instead of saying, defund the police, how about stop police brutality? Like there's no, everybody knows what police brutality is, and it's loaded with moral weight, and there's no unambiguous, like there's no argument for police brutality. It's pretty freaking clear. And if you want to talk about the funding, talk about investing in crime prevention. That's also no unclear words. Investing means that you get back more than you put in. And what's better than preventing crime? Way better than catching people after the fact, preventing crime and
Hmm.
creating safe neighborhoods. So stop trying to invent academic sounding language to every time we do that, we lose a huge chunk of our audience. Just use
Hmm.
simple, clear words and combine them in novel ways. That's like the
Mhm.
trick. That's what Republicans do. They take obvious, clear words and stick them together in ways that get them to mean what they want them to mean.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we've gone very, very deep very quickly. And um, if I could take a step back a little bit, and when you're communicating, you're also communicating to a person, and people are different. One of the things we've learned is that there's the sort of strict hierarchical upbringing and the more open, I would say, curious, and just sort of open upbringing, welcoming and empathetic. So do the words you use mean the same things, or would they mean different things to different people? So talk about how they impact different
Well, bookmark that empathy thought for me because I want to say something about that. But
Okay.
I'm gonna to answer your question. If you think about that criteria of like clarity and stuff like that, the best frames are words that are sort of universally understood. But different words can carry different meaning in different cultures. Um, what's important to understand is framing is about the part of your brain you're trying to activate. It's about a perspective from which you want people to see the situation. The message is whichever words will be most effective at activating that part of the brain in your particular audience. So, message and framing are not necessarily the same thing.
Okay.
Framing isn't even always about the words. It's about the perspective that you want people to see things from. So, like, I recently made the mistake of using the phrase "show me your papers" to people who worked at airport customs. In my brain, "show me your papers" evokes like the Nazis in the movie Casablanca.
Yeah.
In their brain, "show me your papers" is their literal job.
Yeah.
So I had to apologize, and they were nice enough not to kick me out of the room. It did not even occur to me. Like, to me, "show me your papers" is like just emblematic of fascism, but not to not to these people. It's literally their freaking job. Um, so yeah, like I have friends who work very deeply in rural politics, and um, for a while I thought, is what Lakoff is teaching different what they're teaching? Because they're always teaching about like it's about cultural relevancy, like cultural competence, like respecting people's cultures, understanding their cultures. But it's not, because framing is about a perspective, and you have to use whatever language works to get whoever you're talking to see it from that perspective. It's still the same perspective, but the words might be completely different depending on who you're talking to, and that's often like why you need what I'd be like native speakers. Like, even if you're talking about being on Reddit, you need a native Reddit speaker to understand, to navigate the culture of Reddit, or a rural community, whatever kind of, like, there's all different kinds of cultures. So you want so that's what's important. But you mentioned the term empathy, and I remember seeing something just recently, talking to some sort of former MAGA or MAGA type people, and saying they were never taught empathy. Like, they were never, like, they've heard about empathy and they feel like they would like to experience empathy, but nobody ever taught them how. They didn't grow up in an environment where feelings and where that was shunned. Like, they were like, masculinity is like, you be tough, you don't feel. So, um, so I feel like one of the most important things we can do is to model empathy and talk about empathy, and not just throw the word around. I mean,
Mhm.
like, instead of talking about immigrants and saying like, oh well, they're good for the economy, talk about what it must be like for these people, to take these chances,
Mhm.
to take these risks in order to find something better for their families, and um do talk in such a way that evokes empathy, even if what you're doing is you're just simply expressing your own empathy, because there are people out there who literally don't know how it works.
Mhm.
And I was kind of shocked because I'm like, what do you mean? Like, because we just say, oh, you should feel empathy.
Mhm.
And there's people out there who are like, nobody's ever showed me that.
Mhm.
So, I thought that was really powerful. I'm like, we need to demonstrate, we need to help people understand
Mhm.
what empathy really is. And the best way to do that is by showing it.
Mhm. I really feel that. Thank you for explaining that. And sort of along the same lines, one of the things and I feel a little nervous talking about what we teach because I hesitate, I'm hoping we've been doing the right thing. But we teach people to avoid red, blue, Democrat, Republican, and really put your values first. And your values, your ethics, your sort of moral beliefs, and to lead with values, to lead with issues, and that talking about red and blue basically sends people into their corners and in your language, I guess I would say it activates a different, response. So can you talk a bit about, just sort of that concept? Are we on the right track with that?
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly in terms of the red and blue thing, like I do focus groups, sometimes for some unions, and one of the things I really observed this year was, I thought that the union people would just be pissed off at the Republicans about their sort of anti-worker behavior. And what I really heard from them was like, we do not want to hear you talk to us and be like, you should be mad at these guys. We want to hear you tell us what you believe in, what you want, talk to us as Americans, not as
Mm-hmm.
Republicans or Democrats, or talk to us as Americans and tell us what your vision is for this country.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I I was really blown away by that because it's like they're just over all this
Mm-hmm.
blaming who's blaming who. They're like, we need to talk about where we're going,
Yeah.
But when we talk about talking in moral terms, I mean, one of the things is that a lot of people who do communication work on, especially people who do polling and things like that, because they've studied political science, they've taken statistics, we've been trained, I have a degree in political science. We were trained in college to talk in a certain way, to communicate in a certain way, that you talking about facts, you don't put in moral judgment, you don't appeal to emotions, you don't make generalizations, like you just speak very, very specifically and include all the caveats. You don't talk about right and wrong, you talk about effectiveness you know so um and you also get points for using trendy academic catchphrases, but Republicans come from marketing, they come from corporate marketing, they act on emotions. Their mission is to tweak people's feelings to get the results that they're looking for regardless of the facts. So while we're talking about oh, this problem is an effective way to feed the hungry, you know it's efficient, it's cost effective, whatever. They've spent 50 years convincing people that it's morally wrong to feed the hungry. And so we assume that everybody already agrees with us on what we're trying to achieve and that we just, and for many, many years, I think that was true. Like there was a time when Republicans and Democrats both supported immigration. It was just a question of what's the best way to do it. Or we both talked about feeding the hungry, and the argument was which is the best way to do it. That's not the case anymore. Like they've spent 50 years convincing people that we shouldn't be using government at all, that people shouldn't, that helping people is hurting them. Like, um, so they're shifting the ground under our feet. They're changing the way people see the world.
Hmm.
And we're still talking about the most effective way to do something as if everybody already agreed that that thing should be done. So let me so let's talk about the argument for taxing the rich. So we talk about taxing the rich, and people take a poll, and everybody's like, "Yeah, tax the rich." But you have some guy who, imagine this guy, he's like pissed at these rich folks, and he tells the pollster, "I'm all for taxing the rich." But when it comes down to it, he's like, "Well, you know, tax breaks for the rich is the right thing to do because it creates jobs, and because after all, I mean, that guy did earn it, with his hard work." So then he thinks, well, taxing the rich might feel good, but then he gives the Republicans credit for doing the right thing, even though it's unpopular. So we don't win that battle until we undermine that worldview and make it perfectly clear that that people accumulate wealth by cutting jobs, by taking more than their fair share of the public benefits that we provide as the American public, by underpaying workers, by overcharging consumers. We have to take down that 50-year argument that the only way jobs get created is by giving money to rich people so they can make jobs. We have to undermine that case that those who are wealthy um, succeeded because of their extraordinary talent and hard work. And because those things are not true. But if we don't articulate what is true, then no matter how we talk about it, people are still going to think Republicans know better about how jobs get created. And therefore, when it really comes down to it, if you want more jobs, you have to do what the Republicans say to do. So if we want to be seen as the people doing the right thing, then we have to be the people who define what doing the right thing is, and that means making sure that businesses are that workers are getting their fair share of all the wealth that they create in the world.
Hmm.
That means making sure that the wealthy are paying for the for the huge bounty of public services and goods and things that they use to create that wealth, that they need to pay the American people back for that. So we have to um it's really about the underlying perspective of how the world works. And that's a big part of framing is thinking less about that surface argument and more about, if you get people to see the world the right way, then whatever we're talking about is naturally the right way to think about it. If you
Hmm.
can get people to see the world in that way, that's what they've been doing, and that's what we need to be doing.
So essentially, what you're saying is in order to plant the seeds of the right ideas, you have to till the field to create the environment or the landscape in which we grow those seeds.
Yeah, I mean, it's about creating a context in which
Hmm.
what you're talking about makes sense.
Hmm.
Or as another friend of mine calls, it's like we need to build the runway on which to land the plane.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put
Like
it.
we're always flying the plane around, and
Hmm.
you can't land the plane unless you built the runway.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I saw a phrasing of this. It's like, well, they said we have to, run the government like a business. And it's like, yes, they are. They are stripping it for parts and renting it back to us for profit. Something.
I think I saw that same post. I was
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Uh-huh.
exactly. Yes. Why
Mhm.
would we want to run the government like a business?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I have thought for years all the reasons why you shouldn't run government like a business in logical terms and in procedural terms, but I hadn't really thought of it in the way that you were talking about, which is how do you completely shift that landscape to create the environment in which the idea can actually take root. So,
Yeah. Well, I
um,
mean, we're really living in the aftermath of a 50-year project
yes.
to glorify
Yeah. Yeah.
corporate world, to glorify profits, to treat business people as like they're gods. And what's really sad is that like a lot of these places, I mean, you guys know more than anybody about privatizing education.
Hmm.
Um, I was just reading something about how there's these schools where they're forcing college students to go to these like freedom classes where they learn all about how great capitalism, like they're really like, it's almost like they're getting to the point where they realize that students are not having it anymore and they're desperate to be like, oh my God, we have to inculcate them with this capitalist, pro this
Hmm.
Reagan stuff. And it's like, nah, you're losing the battle, buddy. I hate to
Yeah.
tell you, the young people,
Well,
the young
they
folks ain't
do
buying
have
it.
They do have Koch-funded
Yeah.
schools of, I don't know, economics or whatever it is at both ASU and U of A throughout the university system.
Yeah.
And this year is actually the very first year. And if our policy director were on, she would be able to, make sure I'm giving the correct information. But I think this is the first year that in the state budget we have taken money away from those schools. They were getting so much money they couldn't even spend it. So,
Well,
yeah,
what are they getting for it is the question. That's
yeah,
very
I
disturbing.
I have no idea, but um we've been were far beyond in time what I expected for all the questions that I had laid out. But there is something really important that I want to talk about misinformation and disinformation. That is going to be a big part of what we as CBV, what we are focusing on as indivisibles, is what is called pre-bunking and debunking misinformation. And part of it is, in terms of pre-bunking, is inoculating people against the inevitable just flood of misinformation regarding the election. So, can you address that and possibly give us some best practices or how you would approach that huge project?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, one of the things about inoculating is that inoculating works great if you get there first.
Hmm.
But these guys are so good
Yeah.
at one of the things they do is project is they inoculate by projecting. So like if they're about to steal an election, they accuse us of stealing an election.
Right.
So
Hmm.
then when we say, "Oh, they're stealing an election," it just sounds like he said, she said.
Right.
So
Exactly.
they make it impossible for us to criticize them by falsely criticizing us, and then all the arguments that we make to rebut their attack become they just like the whole he said she said just makes it impossible. So what I would say is, first of all, just never debunk a claim.
Hmm.
All you do is light up the parts of people's brains that house the thoughts we don't want them to have. You are better off just saying the thing that is true. In whether you're saying it after the fact or before, rather than saying you're wrong, say this is the thing that is true. Somebody called this bypassing, which is a great way to frame it, actually. They did some research and they proved that you get better results by merely stating the thing that is true and not even mentioning the original falsehood. The true thing debunks the falsehood all by itself, but doesn't trigger backlash. Like if you try to explain why something's wrong, the listener is going to resist and they're going to push back. But if you just say the true thing, so here's a simple example. So if you say, well, Trump falsely accused this Olympic rower of peeling pieces of paint up off the bottom of the reflecting pool. What people are visualizing in their minds is some guy in like spandex peeling shit off the bottom of the collecting of the reflecting pool. So instead of saying that, you say, well, gee, I saw this video of Trump and his entourage driving all over the surface of the reflecting pool bed before they filled it back up with water. I'll bet you that's what messed it up.
Hmm.
So what are you visualizing there? You're picturing a bunch of the heavy black SUVs driving around in the pool. So next time Trump says something about the damn pool, that guy's brain is immediately going to picture a bunch of heavy trucks and SUVs driving all over the reflecting pool. That image overrides the original claim without even bringing it up.
Hmm.
So you can call it a bypass or whatever, but the key is to skip the debunking part and just go right to the truth that inherently refutes
Hmm.
the original claim.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
if you can actually get that truth out there before they do it, great. But they're pretty good at getting their misinformation out there
Hmm.
faster than we can inoculate against it.
But if they are saying fraud, 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 like every two words is the word fraud, election fraud, and, immigrants, illegal, undocumented immigrants voting. I mean, if you say our elections are safe and secure, I mean, and just bypass any denials, is that sufficient? Does that actually do the trick?
It's a heck of a lot better than talking about fraud and elections in the same sentence and reinforcing the association between the two. No, I
Hmm.
mean, you talk about, right, you talk about how, elections in America are actually extremely secure. They're that that they are observed by people from both parties, that things that there's always multiple counts of things. Like there's um yeah, I mean actually, elections in America are remarkably secure. And in some cases, there we have recounts. Um, there's paper trails, there's checking, there's there's a lot of procedures that go into it, but I mean, for the most part, talking about I wouldn't even talk about whether or not elections are secure. Like because I feel like even talking about that is like bringing up the idea that they may or may not be secure. So to some extent, agenda setting is a sort of underappreciated, incredibly important part of framing. Um, which is like what you choose to talk about. Like they want the election to be about fraud. They want the election to be about immigrants. They want the election to be about the idea that federal government programs are wasting your money, that if you can't afford stuff, it's because your taxes are too high because the government is wasting all your money. What we want the elections to be about is corruption. It's about
Hmm.
the fact that people with excessive accumulation of wealth are using it to influence our government and to get favorable treatment. That and so one of the things I really discovered in the focus groups this year, I do them every 2 years, and last time I was hearing people talk about costs of living, prices, and I was trying to get them to think in terms like they were thinking in terms of like, we've always been told that the economy is supposed to work this way, that if you work hard, that you get this, and it just seems broken. It seems like that's not what's really happening. You know, that, that there was sort of this promise, that hard work pays off. And like all of these things that we were raised to believe as Americans are just like, they're not really true. And in the 2 years between the 24 focus groups and this year's focus groups, people are just like, The economy is totally fucking broken. The whole system is broken. And the reason it's broken is because the money people have bought the politics. Like they
Mm,
have, and it's like Democrats, Republicans, like they're they have leapt right from business people are behaving badly to the reason that they've been allowed to get away with this is because they have bought our government. So when they say corruption, like when I first heard people talking about corruption, I was like, "Oh, corruption's important to people. We're going to totally score on this because obviously Trump has been using government to line his pockets." That's not what they mean. They're not talking about lining. I mean, not that they don't hate that, like they do hate that. But when they talk about corruption in government, they don't mean somebody's using their position to line their own pockets. They mean the entire government serves money and not people. Like they have leapt so far
mm,
to, beyond just pissed about the corporate world to they have like to figuring out that the influence of money in politics is the root of all of these economic problems, that government as a whole is serving up people, not them. And
mm,
so that's why these economic populist candidates running around are doing so well, because they are speaking to what people are feeling right now.
mm.
And so my best advice to candidates at this point is get with the program. like the voters are already there, and if you don't catch up, they will leave you behind.
Mhm,
So this is not like you're not trying to push radical language on the voters. They're there. They might not necessarily even know how to articulate it, but like the best thing that you could do is articulate it. They're feeling it. The more that you can express what they're feeling, the more they will love you for it, which is why people like Ossoff, who are out there talking about things in this way, talking about the influence of money, are doing incredibly well. But
mm.
they are there. They're,
That is
yeah,
so interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. I think of corruption exactly as, Trump got a plane
exactly.
from Qatar and, he's lining his pockets and he's now $2 billion richer and that is so interesting that it is beyond that. It's like buying the entire system.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real surprise to me because I was like, oh, they've just skipped over, they've gone straight to Bernie land, and they're there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I
because that's
believe.
what I was thinking. Like, I was
Mhm.
like, oh man, we're gonna really be able to capitalize on this because of all this, this grift. And so it's not that the grift, I mean, the grift is exemplary. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
But if we're only talking about that and we're trying to use it to be like, oh, Democrats are good and Republicans are bad because they're lining their pockets and we're not, they're like, nah.
No.
They're like,
It's
nope, you all been doing
it's both.
this.
It's both.
Like, admit it,
Mhm.
just admit it,
Yep.
get with the
Hmm.
program here.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I
yeah,
love that. I love that. And that totally resonates with me. Um,
it's amazing what you
so
learn from people. Like, I don't, I'm not teaching them, they're teaching me. That's what's so fun about focus groups.
Um, I'm trying to figure out how to we have 10 more minutes and
Hmm.
I want to make good use of it. So I'm trying to figure out how to mush some of my questions together. And part of the territory that I wanted to cover is also the medium as well as the message.
Hmm.
And we are in such a shifting media and communication environment. Um, I worry about social media. I'm sure you've heard the term shitification and how our social media, how Facebook, how, Twitter, everything is just basically so much garbage. What are the best ways to communicate? What are the best platforms or forums or, how do you get that message out?
Well, I mean, in one respect, since framing is about getting people to see things from a certain perspective, it's a strategy that can be used in any format.
Hmm.
And the impact is cumulative. So the more people are exposed to the same framing coming from different sources, the more they will develop the habit of seeing things the right way. It's that repetition that really conditions people's brains. Now, but if you use social media, you should use it to expose people to the right frames. Unfortunately, most like short form social media, like Twitter and Facebook, it's like 80% bots.
Yeah.
Like it's bots talking to bots. Like I'm not even on meta platforms anymore. It's a waste of space. So most short term, I mean short form social media platforms are very segregated. So like Substack and Blue Sky are very, it's like all inside the community, Twitter, Truth Social, whatever. Like we're very split in that way. But my feeling has always been that nothing compares the power of face-to-face communication.
Hmm.
There's a lot of data that shows that real word of mouth is the only thing that actually persuades people. So, let me see. There's like a few points that I'm gonna try to hit on a few good things I want to make sure to get out there in the time we have. So I would say, first of all, uh, word of mouth is absolutely critical. And that means trying to use language that people could repeat in normal conversation. Trying to sound witty and snarky and like that's fine and dandy, but casual language is important. To say things in a way that somebody could turn around and say to somebody in the real world, that is critically important. But also, pardon me,
That's okay.
the social media that is growing in audience is that which mimics face-to-face communication.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the kind of TikTok video, Substack Live, where it's just a person talking into the camera, that is as close to person communication as you get on social media. So that's what's growing. And also longer format stuff. So that one-on-one face-to-face thing, and then people watching people have conversations. And what's interesting is that the fastest growing stuff that's being consumed is video that is longer, like 7 minutes to 30 minutes. Um, so I think that, if you can do 30 minutes on how wealth hoarding makes it possible for the rich to outsource labor or retool factories or replace people with robots, or like great, because I think what people are doing is they're like putting on YouTube and they're just leaving it on while they do stuff.
Hmm.
So, and they don't want to have to pick a new video. They're perfectly happy to put somebody on who's going to talk for an hour.
Hmm.
Um, but also, one of the things that's really important that we need to keep in mind is that like people who seek out information are not undecided voters.
Hmm.
Like in places like Substack, like my Substack feed is full of the most brilliant, insightful, I mean, really exciting conversation. People talking about environmental move, advances environment, what's going on. Like it's so smart and thoughtful. Like I've never been consuming such good stuff in my life, but there's not undecided. This is not a community of undecided voters. The legendary Hal Malchow did some really interesting research, and he found that there is a subset of voters that don't even know who's in charge of the House, like right now, like that literally don't know which party controls the House.
Hmm.
Like that's the question they use in the surveys to determine like what constitutes a relatively uninformed voter. But what they found is that people who did know, those are not undecided voters. The people who don't know not only are the undecided voters, but they're incredibly susceptible to communication. So if you like, we really need to spend less time worrying about the sort of inside conversation, what's happening in the news, and more time focusing on people who like he found that even giving basic facts to people who know almost nothing about what's actually happening was is moving their positions. So like the typical campaign ad or the typical political communication moves public opinion. It's considered successful if it moves people's opinions by like 2 points. Three is like huge. Three is the top. These studies were finding that like in this particular group of people, they're moving opinions by 25, 30 points just by giving them like fundamental basic facts. Um, I actually participated in a postcard project with the Progressive Turnout Project where we went into Virginia in the governor's election, and we did things like we sent postcards that basically said, this program cut funding to farmers. And we got like among this one subset of voters, we got like 25 points of we moved their opinion on supporting the Democratic candidates by like 25 points. So when you're out there, and I don't know what the solution to that is because I don't know where you find these people in particular, but they're more likely to be your neighbor than somebody that you run across on Substack.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the important thing is don't assume people have like when you're sorry, alarm just went off. When you're watching the news, like a news story assumes you know what happened yesterday. It's telling you what happened today that's different than what happened yesterday. It assumes the foreknowledge of the previous day's news and back and back back. When we're communicating with people, we have to remember that the people we're really trying to reach may not have any context. They may not know what's going on. A lot of what we can do to help reach the people we need to reach is just give them clear, basic descriptions of what the heck is happening.
Hmm.
And, but to do that from a perspective that really gets to think about them in terms of having empathy for who's affected by whatever is happening.
Hmm.
And if we focus more on that than on, racking up likes on whatever, you know, then I think that we will be more effective. And if that means and that means, talk going door to door, talking to friends and neighbors, being able to talk about things effectively in conversation, that's just one of the most absolutely important things that we can do. Um, and then if we can, like do those videos where you are talking sincerely to somebody like the way I am talking to you now, like just face to
Hmm.
face, that is really effective. And people like who's the guy who's the attorney general in North Carolina? He does really good videos. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Jeff something. Anyway, starts with a J. Does these great little explainer videos where he just explains what's going on and then just, that stuff works.
Hmm. I
So
will look up
you
the
know,
Attorney General in North Carolina.
it's somebody will know what his name is. He's got a very big social media following. But that stuff really works. It's very effective.
Wow. Well, that is a wonderful way to sort of bring this conversation to a close. And so I have to ask, is there anything we didn't cover that you really wanted to make sure to get across? Is there anything I didn't ask that you think is, really important for people to understand about the year that we are in right now and the challenges ahead of us? I know that's a very broad
No, I mean,
question.
I think I kind of hit on most of the points that I
Ah,
want to hit on. I'm
Jeff
trying to think if there's
Jackson.
any Jeff Jackson. Yes,
There we go.
his videos are
Thanks,
very good.
Ellen.
Um, I mean, I think I just want to emphasize just how fed up people are and how I think we got to the point that we're in right now by failing to recognize that and by having them, like there's some interesting kind of alternative economists out there talking about things how like um so sometimes we refer to this idea that like it used to take one full-time salary to support a family, to
Mhm,
retire, to buy a house, all this, and now it takes like two and a half. But the economists say when they say household income has kept up with inflation, when they frame it as household income, they're completely framing out the idea that it takes two and a half jobs to make up a household income, whereas it used to take one. And the
mhm,
entire social cost of that. So there's a lot of ways in which the language of economics hides the reality that people are experiencing. So there's all this gaslighting going on. And then the price of inflation, but inflation is measured, then like the cost of buying a home has risen by like five times the rate of inflation. The cost of healthcare has risen 12 times the rate of inflation. So if inflation, the measure of inflation doesn't include education, housing, and healthcare, what the fuck is it measuring? You know what I mean? So, we lost in 2016 and 2024, we were out there telling people the economy was doing great because household incomes were keeping up with inflation. And meanwhile, they're like, yes, but mom and dad both have full-time jobs plus side hustles, and we don't have any time to spend with our kids, and I can't buy a house. And I now have like a $14,000 uh, healthcare premium. What the fuck?
mhm,
So I think we have to realize that people have been feeling gaslit and frustrated, and they've been feeling gaslit by us, um, even if we have done a better job at handling the economy, which we have.
mhm,
But in the big campaigns, we have been telling them that things are going well when they knew they weren't. And we haven't been recognizing that huge gap between just the how many hours you have to work and what you're able to buy for it. So that's why we found ourselves in the situation where we have to acknowledge, like we finally have to get out there, and it's not radical or socialist to acknowledge that our economic system is seriously broken.
mhm,
It's acknowledging the reality of what's happening in people's lives, and we just cannot be afraid to do it, and we don't have to use fancy political theory language. We don't have to use the word socialism. We can talk about fairness,
mhm,
like and but really, I cannot emphasize enough that we just have to be clear and straightforward and empathetic and absolutely recognize how hard it is for people out there.
mhm,
And if we can't do that, then we're not gonna win people over.
mhm.
So
Yeah, one of my many missions in life is to create a new standard of measuring our economy that is not GDP, it's not the stock market, but it measures the lives that people actually live. And I am going to keep looking for that. So,
absolutely.
Antonia, this has been so wonderful, and I'm going to echo one of our wonderful listeners here, which is I have gotten more out of this than I dared to hope. So,
Oh, that's lovely.
I
Thank you.
feel that way, and also Marcel in our audience feels that way. So I can't think of any better thing to say than thank you. And this has been absolutely a wonderful conversation. And I thank you so much for agreeing to do it with us. So
Oh,
I,
it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
okay, thank you for caring about Arizona.
Oh, you
What a
guys are you
crazy
guys are
state.
always in my heart.
No, thank
You
you.
know that.
I wish we had had more time, but we respect everyone's time. So thank you all so, so much. And maybe we'll do it again. So,
And I for some reason I hit a button that shrunk my window and I couldn't see it. Like I haven't seen a thing that's in the chat. So if anybody
mhm,
wants to ask me a question, you can find my newsletter on Substack, Reframing America. My email address and phone number are at the bottom of it.
mhm,
So you got a question, you just shoot me an email. I'm always happy to, something a clarification or a question you didn't get to ask. Please
mhm.
feel free to reach out.
Great.
I'm
And
fairly easy to get a hold of.
yeah, my wonderful team has been posting all kinds of links
Great,
about your Substack and how to follow you, et cetera, et cetera. So you can expect to hear some things. So thank you
great.
again. Thank you so much.
Oh, my
Thank you to
pleasure.
everybody who came and listened to this live. So good night.
All right, thank you. Bye bye.